I remember trying the Signalis demo and not being a fan of it. That was definitely not the popular opinion back then, but I wasn't really looking forward to Signalis' release. However, as soon as the game was released, it was clear we had a new indie darling. But what grabbed my attention was the fact that not just the aesthetics and gameplay were getting attention, but the story and storytelling as well. Now, even with my skepticism, I couldn't pass up on a chance to play a horror game that has a great story. Well, not much of a skeptic if I played this one on release week, am I? This game wears its influences proudly. Saying it's inspired by old Silent Hill and Resident Evil games is like saying that the Pokemon fan on Twitter is a furry. It's obvious and they are proud of it. There are probably other game influences, but in terms of old PlayStation survival horror, these are the ones I am familiar with. This game, however, seems pretty confident in its own vision as much as it takes from the older classics. It has changes to gameplay and story that stops it from feeling like the old game from different developers trying to create the exact same feeling, which is not a bad thing, but combined with its unique storytelling, presentation and atmosphere, Signalis feels pretty one of a kind. The visuals in Signalis are sharp and detailed. The whole aesthetic of the game seems to be really well thought out, from the lighting to the pixel art to the direction of the moody and stylized cutscenes. I was unsure whether the anime style it seemed to be going for would work well, but I think in the end it worked out really well. It does make cutscenes pop even more compared to the gameplay. The cutscenes that are there are obtuse, relying on visuals more than dialogue, often as the scenes are cut with some stylized text or a series of images. It feels hard to interpret through the glitchy jumbled presentation, and that goes well with the tone of the story as well. All the interactable objects and items feel like fully realized devices. It was always a joy when you inspect something and the camera zooms in to the first person to show you a retro futuristic machine or just a normal sight in beautifully done pixel art. And the effects make all of these complete. The feel of a CRT on the game itself, the UI feeling like looking through an old screen, the slightly glitchy way the combat aiming works gives a feel of a system that can't keep up as it ages. The environments have a lot of thought put into them. The awful conditions of some areas, the propaganda posters mixed with often clinical looking industrial conditions really sell the setting of the authoritarian hell, and how the spread of whatever awful thing is happening to the replicas affects these surroundings. It's great. There's extreme detail put into the textures from the weapons to the various items, each of which has a nice 3D model you can just spin around and look at in the inventory. The art direction itself also works really well for the atmosphere of the game, in creating a world that feels tangible. There is no oversight anywhere. If I had to complain, I would say that all the replicas looking like female androids feels kind of boring. Like there's some variety, but I would have loved it if they went more insane with the designs. Also, what is up with the walking animation? This really remind me of the uncanny Boston Dynamic robot movement that really took me a bit to get used to, and it still feels off. My small nitpicks aside, everything about the visuals feels confident and cohesive. I consider this among the best looking indie games I have played. The details carry over to the sound design as well. Each and everything you interact with seems to give some nice feedback. A lot of it feels tactile. Every sound feels like it fits perfectly in the world and fits whatever is producing that sound. Makes it really nice to interact with the various retrofuturistic gizmo. This really peaks with the radio. It's a recurring element in the gameplay, and every time I had to use it I got excited. The sound it makes from static to tuning into various different frequencies to the rare message, it all sounds amazing. That alone made me excited to use the radio each time. All the sounds are consistently high quality, which really helps the whole thing feel immersive. I am always of the opinion that good sound can make something feel real no matter what the visuals are, and in this particular case they complement each other perfectly. I do have my issues with the sound though, and that mostly comes from exploring the levels. The droning ambience does get monotonous at one point. All the tracks feel so similar to each other that the soundscape of the game blends in for me, and the different parts of the levels don't feel distinct. It's like listening to a monotone review of a video game on YouTube. There also seems to be a lack of environmental audio. An unearthly growl, dripping water, air whooshing through, a rusted metal fan, anything can add a bit of variety to the level's sounds. Like there's this exhaust fan and it doesn't even make noise. I actually didn't realize how many total tracks the game had in it before I looked up the soundtrack after finishing my first playthrough of the game. The tracks when the enemies are alerted remind me of a particular Silent Hill track, and the electronic touches to it feel really suitable for the setting of the game. It could have been a bit more harsh, that would have suited the tone better. I do, however, like the piano tracks that are present during cutscenes or at certain parts of a game a lot. A lot of these do a good job of building up a melancholy and somewhat mysterious atmosphere to the scenes they are present in. Keep in mind, my criticisms aren't that the sound design and music are bad, they're adequate, but I was hoping for everything to stand out more. I feel similarly about the gameplay as well. It's well done, but the lack of variety in enemies, and I don't mean visual varieties, there are a few different types, but the fact that most of them can be dealt with similarly makes the encounters themselves boring. The limited 6 slot inventory and puzzles means that you will be going through the same corridors, dodging the same enemies in a similar way over and over again. There are unique enemies in this game, like these ones you deal with using the radio, but they are few and far between. Enemies can seem non-threatening, which is a problem for a survival horror game. I cannot remember ever opening a door and being surprised in this game, or having any part of the encounters I actively dreaded. The combat in this game also isn't particularly interesting. You cannot kill the enemies permanently without using a rare resource called the flares, so shooting them feels mostly pointless for most of the game, except for the rare cases where you need an item in the middle of enemies, which can be a bit of a problem because the interaction prompts in this game can be kinda jacked. Be it picking up items, opening doors, climbing up ladders, the game sometimes just doesn't seem to register your inputs. That can mean needlessly taking hits. It's an annoyance that lasted me through the whole game. The controls are mostly good still. I really like the fact that you can use both mouse and keyboard to pick up stuff and interact with things on screen. It's a nice touch. There's also the matter of the inventory limit. I thought it was mostly fine, but the amount of items with different weapons, healing and ammo types does mean that the inventory can be filled up pretty quick. The problem comes when solving puzzles that require 2-3 inventory slots and one for getting an item by solving the puzzle, which means sometimes when I came across a room with a few items and instead of being excited for new supplies, I was annoyed that I would have to make trips to get everything back. Though I do blame it partly on myself for playing on normal difficulty. On normal, there's too much supplies. I am not particularly good at these types of games, but I was still left with an excess of supplies at the end, which I kept collecting because I was never quite sure what the end game will throw at me. Survival difficulty fixes this issue somewhat, but it doesn't fix the enemies. But on the other hand, something I did enjoy a lot throughout the game were the various puzzles. The difficulty seems pretty much perfect. The game starts with more mechanical puzzles where you mess around with jars and switches to get the solution and then slowly moves to more riddle based puzzles and a mix of both. I loved all the puzzles in the game. None of them felt obtuse and unsolvable, but still felt satisfying to solve in the end. It's a hard balance between being needlessly difficult and being laughably easy. The game just has a well done difficulty curve in puzzle. I won't spoil any of them here, but there are puzzles here which are some of my favorites in any game. The real hike in difficulty in terms of puzzles is piecing together the story itself. The story is a mix of themes and events that will be exceptionally hard to make complete sense of while playing, and only some of the connections become apparent after finishing the whole game, and it still leaves you with more questions than you went in with. And I absolutely love it. I will not try to go over the plot of the game and timeline of the events, and the reason is simple. I have not figured it out completely, so it will be a surface level view, which does not do this game's narrative justice. Secondly, it's way more fun connecting the dots yourself. So what I am gonna do is basically give a brief view of the tone of the story, the way it's told, and its themes. The story itself starts like this. A Penrose shuttle from the nation of Yusan crashes on a planet. Your character awakens. You are an Elstar replica and your Gestalt officer who had to be with you on the shuttle is nowhere to be seen. And from there, your journey to find her starts. You arrive at a facility where a lot of the population is dead and the rest infected with something. But you continue your search through this horror, while the world building tightens the grip on you with details about an authoritarian rule through a star system. There's so much attention paid to everything in here. The enemy types you see, the locations you visit, hell, even the 6 slot inventory limit you have is explained by an in-game poster saying why that is. And this world building does lead to some really cool storytelling as well. Like we learn that the colibri are a hive mind who enjoy staying connected and singing with all the other colibri. But when you find one alone with all the other colibri infected, she's confused. She doesn't understand what happened and now just seeks to be alone, away from the new violent song. Other than the world building, the game uses these weird surreal cutscenes. They cut in images, text in German, or numbers in between. The dialogue also feels sort of distant and vague, but sometimes it can be personal, a mix of dream and nightmarish presentation. And I have been trying my hardest not to say it so far, but there is a Silent Hill feel to the dialogue. There is a lot of puzzles, symbolism, and cryptic text lying here and there, all of which add something to the main story of the world itself. There are themes of self as the replica's expression and emotions are limited under the living conditions, themes of loneliness and even finding love. It all makes for a really interesting and even in its cryptic nature a touching story. I do find one of the characters' journeys unsatisfying, and there was a point where I was too confused with the story and kind of annoyed. But the way the game ends is both mechanically and thematically satisfying, and I can't imagine there being a better resolution to the journey. Wait, there are multiple endings? I won't go into detail about the story of the endings, but consider this a spoiler. So, the endings are based on how you played the game. There's 4 endings, and everyone I know got either the memory ending or the promise ending. The endings are dependent on the gameplay, and the more time spent and more enemies killed, the more it will push you towards promise. Miss, quick and evasive will lead you towards the memory ending. Really like what was done with these endings. All of them are thematically resonant. Though I am not sure I like the gameplay implications of it that much. Like you get the memory ending for playing fast and well, which seems kind of weird, and leave ending for taking damage, talking to NPCs constantly, and interacting with unopenable doors. Maybe I shouldn't consider these endings as worse, but the fact that promise ending seems the most fulfilling, and you get that by being really aggressive, feels kind of off. Not sure how to end this review. I'm not even sure if my conventionally structured style was the best endorsement for the game, which follows a really weird structure, which I hope came through in my review. In simple terms, go play this game. There are certain parts I don't like, but I do feel like it's one of the best narratives I have come across in a horror game, and the uniqueness of its presentation being its strongest aspect, which makes the game better than the sum of its parts, though it's clear there are still parts I need to search for.